Well, we're back talking sheep. Last time we spoke about what to do to get your property ready for sheep and to prepare yourself to have a really positive experience. Today I'm with Gavin Wall, past principal of Marinda Limousin and Suffolk Sheep Stud, past president of the Australian Stud Sheep Breeders Association and international sheep and cattle judge, and he's here to help you have a much easier time of bringing your new sheep home. Gavin, how are you, mate?
Really good, and today we're here to do the 3 R's. We're going to get right into it: the responsibility, rotations and relationships, and a few other things to add on there as well.
Mate, there's lots of knowledge coming. Guys, strap yourselves in. If last time was any indication, we're going to learn a lot. Let's get into talking about what to do when you get home with your sheep. It can be a bit stressful when you get your sheep home for the first time and you wonder what on earth you've done and what on earth you're doing. So today should help people out with some of the basics.
We're going to aim to reduce that stress.
Today's video is brought to you by Davo's fencing clip. Designed, manufactured and owned in Australia, this innovative little clip makes repairing or building fences super easy and satisfying. For timber, steel or plastic posts. Follow the link in the description to get yours today. Now Gavin, before we get home, you want us to stop and get something on the way?
Yes, when we picked up our sheep, we read the sheep health statement and we noticed what drench they'd used.
Yep.
So we need to get an alternate drench to that on the way home. And our area may be predisposed to Barber's pole worm. So we need to get a triple acting drench to make sure that we don't bring any new source of Barber's pole onto the property.
Now we know it's a triple acting drench because it will have 3 active ingredients listed underneath the brand name on the label.
Correct.
And we want to get actives that are hopefully different to the last drench that was used.
Yes, there's no point using the same old that's been given to the sheep for any number of years. So let's just make sure that we've got the right type of drench. And if we're small numbers, we've only got a dozen, we don't need to be going and buying 20 litres. Just get a small pack that will suit you for a couple of drenches and then rotate. And maybe if you've got a good neighbour that you're working with and got a good relationship with, you can swap drenches so that it makes it easier for you.
And the other thing is, when we get the sheep home and we drench them, we're going to make a note of the expiry date, the batch number and the product that we used and the date.
Correct. All of that, and you're going to lock it away in a safe cabinet so that it's safe.
And you should keep all of your medications out of sun and out of the heat, and you should try and keep them in a cool place.
Correct.
Now Gavin, we're already making good use of the yards that we built before we even thought about buying sheep, and we've got them all yarded up. Your suggestion is to keep them quarantined if you have existing livestock for a while?
Yes, now it's going to depend on the size of your property. If you only got a small property, it may mean that you're going to keep them in those yards for 10 days, 2 weeks quarantine. Because if small property, you might use up too much of that property in quarantine, and then you're going to need that pasture in a rotation later on.
So the idea about quarantine is not just quarantining them from animals that exist already on your property and preventing the crossover of worm burden and lice and various other parasites, but it's also to stop the sheep from emptying out from weed seeds and things that the environment that they've come from and spreading those into your paddocks straight away, isn't it?
Correct, yes. It's ideal if they've been on a property that maybe had Paterson's curse, there may be some seed in the gut and it will empty out on your property, and you don't want a purple farm.
Absolutely not. So quarantine is not just about the livestock that you already have on the place, it's also about protecting your paddocks and all of the work that you've put into the place preparing for your livestock.
Exactly.
So Gavin, it's critical, even though you've only got 2 or 3 sheep at home potentially, that you understand your role in the broader scheme of things for stopping resistance to drenches in worm populations. And there's a really good resource that you can go to find out more, isn't there?
Exactly. There is a resource called WormBoss. If you go to that, there's a lot of information there which will help you understand the internal parasite problems.
And the link to WormBoss is in the description. If you own sheep or goats or cattle, you owe it to yourself and everyone else to have a look at WormBoss. If you don't have a basic set of yards like this, you can just cordon off a corner of the paddock?
Yes, you could do that, a small corner of the paddock, so that you're able to quarantine without putting up elaborate fencing, just to quarantine.
What are some of the considerations that you'd make for animal welfare if you're cordoning off a corner of your paddock, mate?
Well, the essentials: water, shade, shelter, and you're going to need to provide some feed, so it might need to be supplementary feed.
Now, if we're buying feed and there's some cheap hay down the road, what are some alarm bells that would come from that?
As we've said in other videos, cheap and nasty. If the hay's cheap, it's cheap for a reason. It may look good, but if there's seeds in there, weed seeds in there that you don't want, and even some, like barley grass or silver grass and things like that you haven't got on your property, then my suggestion is you pay an extra $1 or $2 and buy good hay, either lucerne hay, alfalfa if you're in America, or subclover hay. It will be a lot better in the long run.
Now, some retailers that sell to a hobby farm market aren't necessarily going to give you a vendor declaration. How do you tell good hay from bad hay?
Really good question. Without opening it up, it's hard to tell the hay from the outside, but if you've got a chance to open up the bale and just have a look, and good, clean, at least second cut lucerne, should be good quality. And for sheep, if it's real stalky, they may not want to eat the stalks, but if it's nice, fine stem lucerne hay, you won't get better. The sheep will clean it up.
Smells sweet, no mould, and very little dust. It's good. Now, Gavin, grain. A lot of people with new sheep are going to want to give their sheep a little bit of a treat because it makes them feel good, particularly hobby farmers. They like to feed out a little bit of grain out of their hand in the morning. Be careful with that.
Yes, a little is okay. A lot is not really good, because some grains, particularly wheat and barley, may give the sheep acidosis or really bad indigestion, and they may not recover from it. So
you come back and find dead sheep in the morning.
Yeah, a little is better, a lot is no go.
And if you're going to change the diet of the sheep at all throughout the season, say you run out of pasture in the paddock and you're trying to get them across onto lucerne and things like that, you should do it over a period of weeks.
Yes, enable the sheep's gut to adjust to the new feed. So if you know you're going to run out of feed, pre-plan and make the transition gradual so that the gut adjusts at the same time.
Because what a lot of people don't understand is that the rumen of an animal is a really complex microflora all of its own. We've got bacteria and protozoa and fungi in there, millions of different species, and they all adjust depending on the feed that the animal's getting, don't they?
Yes, and to increase the amount of grain will raise the acidity, and we don't want an acid.
And acid damage to the rumen is permanent, isn't it?
It can lead to something what they call laminitis, where the feet actually come away from the hoof and they're very, very lame for quite some time. So by being very careful how you introduce any grains, you can avoid those problems.
Now, Gavin, the next thing that we're going to talk about is protecting what's already there. Now that you've got your sheep home, you need to move them quite regularly over the grass and rotate them, which is the second of our R's that we're talking about today.
Correct. We need to rotate for two reasons. One is to look after your pasture and to minimise the worm burden build-up in your pasture. If you graze your pasture down too short, then it's going to take a while to recover, as well as the sheep are going to pick up more worm eggs.
I suppose the way I always think about it is that's a solar panel. And if I want to feed the root system, I need the solar panel to be generating energy. So if I take more than that off the solar panel, then I've got no resource for energy to regrow the plant, have I?
Exactly, and a rule of thumb is if you've taken that much off the top, there will be a corresponding volume of roots die off underneath. Now, if you take that back too short, then your roots are short and it doesn't have the power to regenerate.
So as long as we don't take too much grass off the top, a little bit of root dieback on the bottom is good, because it's actually putting carbon back into the soil. And we've got plenty of leaf surface area to regenerate those roots quickly and rapidly and take advantage of that fertiliser that's been left there by the past roots.
Absolutely correct.
Now, the grass length is also important with the worm cycle, isn't it? Because it can take 3 days for eggs that are in the animal's faeces to hatch and turn into larvae, and then the larvae climb up the grass leaves to reinfect the animal when they eat the grass, and it depends how high the grass is as to how much larvae get to the animals, doesn't it?
Yes, if your grass is eaten down really short, then the worm eggs are right there, and the hungry sheep are going to chew the grass and ingest the worm eggs as well.
So by keeping our grass long, we're keeping the mouths of the sheep away from an infection source, and we're also keeping the solar panels in play so that we can regenerate roots and shoots rapidly and keep our pasture greener for longer.
Yes, that's all the many advantages of rotational grazing.
Now, On my small property here, I've got 7 paddocks. What do you think would be the minimum number of paddocks that people should try and aim for?
If you've got a very small holding, then probably 3. But again, you're going to have to assess what you can afford. But certainly if you've got fixed grazing, the sheep are on the same spot all the time, it's nowhere near as good as if you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 and more paddocks. The more paddocks you've got, the longer your spell period in between rotating around.
And people can use something as simple as a temporary electric fence to increase the number of effective paddocks in their one large paddock, can't they? They can just move the electric fence every week.
That's a very cost-effective means of dividing up your property into smaller paddocks, and maybe in the cartwheel system where you've got one water point that you can utilise without having to move it. So that would be an option that I would recommend if you're in have a small holding and don't want to put up permanent fences. Use the electric fence, because once sheep have been trained to it, they will abide by it.
So rotate, keep your sheep healthy, and more importantly, keep your grass healthy, because that's where all your sheep come from.
Exactly.
Now there's a great example of the benefits of ground cover that we've been talking about here as well, Gavin. We've got some lovely plantain here, and then we've got some bare soil right next to it. And if I take a photo of that, you know how I love gadgets. And the plantain just here is sitting at about 34 degrees, and the surface of the bare soil just there is sitting at just over 70 degrees Celsius.
And that's within
half a metre
or less. That is amazing, and it's certainly an example to show you why we need to keep ground cover, and by utilising rotational grazing effectively, we can keep our soil cooler and therefore less evaporation. And here, where it's cooler, we're getting a lot more growth. A really great example of why we need to rotational graze.
And we can take that up another notch. If we go back over to where we were, where the trees are, that grass is barely above 20 degrees. And from my reading, my understanding of grass is that it photosynthesises optimally somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius. So trees are good for the paddock, aren't they?
Trees are wonderful. I've read information that says you can put up to 30% of your property in tree, hedgerows, etc., and still maintain the same productivity off that remaining 70%. So,
because you're getting extra growth out of it because of the influence of the trees.
Yes, you've got less wind, lots of things, but in planting the right trees so that they don't have great big roots going right out into your paddocks, that's another thing perhaps for another video another day.
Let's do it. So Gavin, there's a few things apart from just rotating your pastures that are important to know about them as well, and that is that there are some weed species that can be quite toxic to your stock.
Yes, and that's going to vary from district to district, and if you're not sure, ask a friend, ask the department which are the weeds that may be toxic. So the weeds that I'm familiar with mainly is heliotrope. Ragwort, I understand, can be dangerous as well, but certainly with heliotrope and Paterson's curse, you'll get the yellows, and once they get a belly full of that, you're in trouble.
Now explain to me yellows, because these are symptoms that are common to a lot of plant poisonings, and there's something to watch out for, aren't they?
Yes, it's where the toxicity builds up in the liver, I understand, and if you pull the eyelid down or open the mouth and look at the gums, they'll either be white, but certainly with the eyelid and the yellows is where I've seen it in the past.
So if they look jaundiced underneath the eyelid or in the mouth, you know that you could well have a plant toxicity problem, and it's best to get onto the vet quickly with that one, isn't it?
Yes, I would suggest so. Now that may have happened at the property that you bought them from, and you've got no weeds on your property, so that's a difficult one.
Now, improving our pastures, we all want to do it. I'm doing mine by having as many species as possible, but some people will want to go to their local seed merchant and get some ryegrass and things. There can be some problems with that for certain species.
Yes, I think, again, it's going to depend on your rainfall, your soil, etc. And if you need advice on that, your agronomist or your feed supplier or your seed supplier, they may be able to direct you to the right species, because yes, some of the ryegrass do build up some toxicity. Ryegrass staggers in sheep's not pleasant to have. So yeah, look at
And that's caused by a disease called ergot, isn't it? And you can actually get varieties of grass that are more resistant to ergot than others, can't you?
I believe so, yes.
Now the last one I find quite fascinating, and that is that you regaled me with a story earlier about pine needles. Can you tell me a little bit about pine needles and their effect on pregnant sheep and cattle?
That's a really interesting one in that I read, I haven't experienced the problem, but they tell me pine needles are high in manganese and it can impact, particularly with cattle. If cattle are in the late stages, late trimester of pregnancy, it can cause abortion in them, and I imagine it would do the same in sheep. This is green pine needles, I believe, not a very palatable
no, they'd be running out of food to go for them, wouldn't they?
Exactly, and again, if we're rotating and the feed's not short, they're not going looking for those things that may become toxic to them.
All right, now our sheep are home. We know that their paddocks are safe for them. We've given them a drench. We're isolating them. We've got them in quarantine. We want to do an inspection. Can we go and have a look at the sheep and just take us through how to inspect your sheep?
Just a basic yes.
Perfect, let's go.
No worries, we'll catch one and have a quick look. Okay, we just need to be gentle. We don't rush in there and frighten the sheep, so just position yourself so you're going to be able to control the sheep. So let's try.
So you do the head-on approach there, Gavin? One hand either side of the eyes?
Yeah, just mesmerise them and do it gently. So what we're looking for, any sign, nice, beautiful, clear eye, so no yellows there. It will be quite yellow. And if they have a worm burden, which we wouldn't expect because we've drenched them again, their gums will be really white. And here we got lovely pink gums, healthy. She might need to use some of that fancy toothpaste, but that indicates she's been eating green grass. So, all good there. So we're going to just check. They haven't been rubbing, so we're not going to expect to find any lice, so we need to look on the skin, on the shoulder, and that's where you will find lice. Now, if there's only a couple of lice there, you might be lucky to find them. But if after a while they're rubbing and it's ropey there, you've probably got lice or maybe grass seeds. So quick health check, and then we just need to see them walking to make sure that they're not lame, and we can't tell if they're lame there now, so we'll let them out to have a little walk. Okay, now I'd like to point out that I have this cane here as a guide, not to whack the sheep. You just must not do that. If you've got a yell or whack, then reassess your sheep management. This helps me guide the sheep in the right direction. So we just watch those sheep that they're putting all 4 feet down and not carrying one. Like my dad used to say, doing arithmetic, putting down 3 and carrying 1. This surface is absolutely fantastic. We can get a clear view of the sheep. They're not slipping, sliding, and we can see that they're putting all 4 feet down. So we know that they don't have a foot problem of any nature. Really important. So come on, girls. And boys, come on. Over there. So we give them a clean bill of health, ready to release into our paddocks and start the rotational process.
We've spent all of this time and money and effort worming our sheep and making sure that they're parasite free. It's important to worm our dog as well, isn't it?
Yes, if we've got a dog, a guardian dog, any type of dog, we need to make sure that they're worm free as well. So do them at the same time with a recognised product that will take care of the internal parasites within your dog.
Now we've also set up our paddocks as well, haven't we, Gavin? We've opened all of the gates in the right direction to facilitate easy movement of the livestock because we're going to put them in a far paddock.
Yes, always open the gate into the paddock. Otherwise you'll get the sheep coming behind the gate and you'll have problems maybe getting them through the gateway.
So open the gate in the same direction the sheep are going to be moving.
Exactly.
Right, let's go and move these sheep, mate.
Right on. Plenty of feed, plenty of shade, plenty of water. What more could they want?
Now last but not least, Gavin, there will be times where we want to give some feed to our animals, which means we have to store it, and we've got to keep our sheep and cattle feed away from what's called restricted animal material, or RAM. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why?
Yes, some of the other, particularly poultry feed, has some additives in it that we cannot feed to sheep and cattle.
So meat byproducts and things like that.
So we just need to be careful that we're only feeding supplementary feed that is suitable for your sheep.
And it's good for people to know with small hobby farms, other people might feed their animals from time to time and become confused. So the best way to avoid that is keep your chook feed in a separate building, not just in a separate part of the shed.
And labelled such.
Now storage, it's important that we store this right. We don't want vermin getting in, do we?
No, ideally we need to keep it weatherproof, and ideally we need to have a structure that is vermin-proof. However, we accept that that's not always possible.
This is certainly not a vermin-proof structure. And we can see some results with the plastic container right here, can't we?
Yes. Certainly if you can store in a situation like this in a metal container, then the rodents aren't going to get in. But if you store in plastic, they will find a way.
And they will eat through a really solid bin lid just to get to the goodness within.
Correct.
If you do have a vermin problem, there is always your backup plan of leaving some rat bait out or some poison for them, but there are environmental consequences to that, aren't there, Gavin?
Yes, it is a plan B or a backup, a means of last resort, because the rat baits can impact the environment, and particularly the owls, etc., that may feed on the dead rats from the rat bait.
And if you've got a dirt floor like this that is prone to getting moist in winter, it's best to keep your hay up off it, even if that's just on a pallet, isn't it?
That's the ideal way of keeping it out of the moisture, because if your hay gets wet, it will go mouldy, and then it's a real problem if you're feeding mouldy feed to your sheep. Real problem, so be very careful of that.
Well, Gavin, thanks very much for taking us through now the second part to this series, and that is what to do when you first get your sheep home. We've learned a lot, hopefully, and we've got some great things to put into practice so that our sheep can be nice and relaxed.
Exactly, and that's what we want the whole experience to be. As we said at the start, form the relationship. When they get the sheep home, rotate the pastures, rotate the drenches, and any other thing that you need rotating.
And be responsible.
Be responsible, and you'll enjoy the whole experience. And we've got some good pointers where you can get more information. Don't hesitate to go to that. And if you still hesitate, just ask someone who can point you in the right direction.
Well, thanks very much, Gavin. It's been a wonderful experience again with you, with someone that knows all about their sheep. Don't forget, guys, if you like this kind of stuff, it's important you hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. There's plenty more on timthompson.ag, and there is a great resource in WormBoss. If you're looking for parasite control in sheep, get onto it in the link below.